And then immediately they'll be throwing millions, if not even billions, at me to do this. So there's an enormous funding bias in science caused by the fact that science is what we economists call a monopsony. There's only one paying customer, and that's the taxpayer via governments. And that colours science in numerous rather depressing ways, not least on the global warming issue, where governments have now largely decided that for reasons of their own political expediency and convenience and profit, they should seize upon this and go around saying global warming is the big issue, because it suddenly makes politicians feel important, because at last there's something they can really get their teeth into, and they can save us from ourselves by savage increases in taxation, wholesale closing down of industries they disapprove of, and also, of course, mindless regulation of what kind of car you can drive, what kind of fuel you can use, how often you can turn your lights on, and even in the UK and Europe, ludicrously now, what kind of light bulbs you can have. And they've told us we have to have a light bulb which, if you drop it, costs $3,000 and a specialist team to come out and clean it up because it's full of poisonous mercury gas, which can kill you if you breathe it in. And this is now the mandatory replacement for all the incandescent bulbs, which you can actually read by, whereas these ghastly fluorescent mercury things, they put out a light which is extremely uncomfortable on the eyes, and it's going to cause an even greater dumbing down of the population than has happened already. They won't be able to read at all.
So, children in North America, children in Canada are taught now. They actually will come home and tell mummy and daddy what they're supposed to believe, and there have even been some extreme cases of denouncing parents who haven't turned their lights off at the right time.
Oh yes, we're straight back into communist territory.
Well, it does,
yeah,
but,
you know, sort of,
so we're told that unless we change radically, the climate will change to such a degree the North will disappear, there'll be mass melting, we won't be able to feed ourselves, and the world eventually will end. Hollywood movies are made to back it up culturally, talk show hosts and so on will echo this. And to dissent from this, and I find this terribly sinister, you become a denier. And the only time that really has been used has been to describe Holocaust deniers who are either mad or evil. So if you question it, you are just like a Nazi.
And so if I were to say that Al Gore et hoc genus omne were Nazis for refusing to debate and allow free speech, that would be unforgivable. But they can call us Nazis by calling us deniers, and everybody merely parrots it and repeats it. So once again, we see an extraordinary double standard in the media, by which if I were to use any such language, they would say, oh, you know, it makes you shiver, it's so extreme. But if they say it, oh, well, you know, that's a fair comment. So it is definitely very, very biased. But in the end, there's a very, very old philosophical principle at stake here. And that is that the truth is the truth is the truth, however many lies are told, however many people tell the lies, and however important the people who tell the lies conceive themselves to be. And the truth is, and we now know this is the truth, that global warming isn't a problem. And let me now turn the tables on you a bit and ask you a question, and it'll be very revealing by how you answer it. I'm going to ask you a straightforward scientific question about the global warming issue. Now, as you know, the theory is that down comes the sunlight into the atmosphere, it comes through in the short wave, so it pierces straight through the atmosphere, hits the ground, is displaced to the long wave where it can interact with greenhouse gases, gets stuck on the way out, and so it can't get out again, and so the planet, atmosphere, and then the oceans warm up. That's the theory, right. So, supposing the oceans and the land do warm up by, let us say, 1 degree Celsius, will the amount of outgoing radiation from the Earth's surface, escaping all the way out through the atmosphere into space, go up with warming of the surface, stay the same if the surface warms, or go down if the surface warms?
Down.
And why do you say that?
Because I thought it was the answer you wanted.
That is indeed very really revealing about you and how congenial you are as a host.
I think the obvious answer would be up.
The obvious answer would be up, and of course you're quite right. Because, am I allowed to stand up and move around, or will that pull all the wires out?
Well, I tell you what, we'll take a break here, and then when we come back, I'll have consulted with the director, and if he says you can dance, for all I care. So back in a few moments...
I won't inflict that on you.
On the Michael Coren Show, you won't go away, I know that. We'll see you soon. Thank goodness I'm a citizen, because otherwise I'd be deported after this show. You know what, I mean, obviously that's hyperbole, but if you question these ideas of man-made global warming, then it's a heresy in contemporary North America. Lord Christopher Monckton, former science advisor to Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister, has radically different views on this. Now, before we went to the break, you asked if you had permission to stand up.
Yes.
It's been granted to you. You may stand, move, do whatever you want.
Marvellous. Well, I'll just explain, first of all, what is going to happen, because you're the victim here.
Oh,
right?
great.
Oh, yes. What we're going to do is we're going to consider that question of whether, if the Earth were to warm up, less radiation would get out from the Earth to outer space, or the same amount, or more. You, first of all, gave me the answer you thought you wanted me to hear, which was that less radiation would get out. You then thought for a bit, and you said, no, why don't I try to give the right answer, which surely is that more radiation will get out. Well, I'm now going to demonstrate this, and if we can have the camera on you as I come and stand behind you just for a few seconds. Now, what I'm now doing is invading the presenter's personal space from behind. The reaction in his body will be, and this is quite well known and measured, an increase in body temperature just for a short time of about 1/10 of a degree Celsius. That will cause the heat to create a slight blush on his skin, which you may not be able to see under the makeup we're both wearing, and that will be the radiation of the heat coming out from his body to equalize the temperature out to this very fine dome-shaped hairless head that you see here. So that is what happens when the Earth warms up. It too radiates out from the rock, like the one you see here, straight out into space. And therefore, as the planet warms, there is an increase in the amount of outgoing radiation from the Earth's surface, which we can measure. And why is this point so absolutely crucial? It is because of this. The whole debate on any of these big policy questions, in the end, always boils down just to one single, simple question. And you have to, first of all, as a policy analyst, as I used to do this sort of stuff for Margaret Thatcher, you have to think, what is the right question to ask? And I would submit to you that the right question to ask is, for a given proportionate increase in the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide, which is cast by the bedwetters as the villain of the piece, how much warming will we get globally? How much warming for a given increase in CO2 concentration? That's the only question that matters. If it's a big amount of warming, if it is, shall we say, 3¼ degrees Celsius, for a doubling of CO2 concentration, as the UN's climate panel thinks it is, then maybe we have a problem, though it certainly won't be as big a problem as they're trying to pretend it is. But here's the point. Suppose it isn't as big an effect as that. Suppose, for instance, it's only ½ degree Celsius of warming for a doubling of CO2 concentration. We're not going to manage to double CO2 concentration until somewhere in the middle of the 22nd century. So we're talking of maybe, if the low climate sensitivity theory is right, the low effect of CO2 theory is right, we're looking at ½ degree Celsius of man-made global warming over a period of 150 years. Now, this is hardly something that's worth worrying about whatsoever. A little bit warmer weather would actually be good for the planet, good for the creatures that live on it, and as evidence of that, perhaps 1% of the world's creatures live in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and perhaps 90% live in the tropics. Why? Because warmer is better for life than colder anyway. So a little bit of warming isn't going to do anyone any harm on any view. So why then did I do the experiment with your head to illustrate the point that once there is a warming of a body like the Earth, it will of course radiate more of that extra heat back out into space? Why is that important? It's important for this reason. The entire case, and I mean the entire case of the bedwetters, the entire case for alarm, the entire case for assuming that you're going to get this 3¼ degrees Celsius of warming for a doubling of CO2 over the next 150 years, the entire case is based just on one false assumption. That false assumption, which is built in to all the computer models on which the case entirely rests, that assumption is that as the world warms in response to the extra CO2 or for any other reason, then less outgoing radiation will escape into space.